What began as an investigation into a kickback scheme involving former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Strain has evolved into allegations of sexual abuse. Sources familiar with the case say investigators are looking into whether or not Strain abused 4 teenagers, some of them underage at the time. When federal investigators began to dig into 2 privately run inmate work release programs in 2015, a series of investigative reports by WWL-TV and the New Orleans Advocate had not only documented unsafe conditions and a lack of supervision of the inmates, but our reports exposed a sweetheart deal Strain had given to the adult children of 2 of his best friends, 2 of his top deputies, David Hansen Sr. and Clifford Skip Keene. State records show Hansen and Keene's children formed a company called St. Tammany Workforce Solutions just a few months before Strain awarded it this no-bid contract to run his Slidell work release program. A federal subpoena issued for documents related to the scheme marked the first real sign investigators were narrowing in on the work release and Strain. And now with Hansen and Keene facing charges of soliciting bribes and conspiracy to commit wire fraud for allegedly conspiring with Strain to cash in, a bill of information against them indicates they will plead guilty, likely testifying against Strain if he's charged. But falling out from that federal investigation, an allegation Strain had sexually abused at least 2 people employed by St. Tammany Workforce Solutions. And now sources say investigators have identified 2 other possible victims, a boy and a girl. Some of the alleged victims may have been underage at the time of the abuse also, according to the sources. At this point, Strain has not been arrested or charged. If there are charges filed about these serious allegations against Strain, those would likely come from the St. Tammany Parish DA's office. We reached out to Strain's attorney, Billy Gibbons, but he declined to comment. Katie Moore, Eyewitness News.